Okay, folks, I'd like to introduce Mr. Mike Roberts. He was a mentor of mine when I was at Auburn University, and Mike has since gone on to work for Aegis Labs, where I like to say he's a bigwig in the company, and be it in a traditional athletic training setting or be it in his current setting, he's been dealing with drug testing for a long period of time, and he can tell us pretty much anything there is to know regarding drug testing. And he's done a lot of other things outside of both Auburn University and Aegis, and I'll put that on his shoulders in terms of giving a little bit of background. But following that, maybe we'll just start with some questions to give us a little bit of an idea, or give Mike a little bit of an idea in terms of where you stand, in terms of your understanding. And then perhaps you can take it from there for a little while. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Noah. Appreciate it. As Noah said, I was director of sports medicine at Auburn University for 15 years when Noah came through, along with a number of other graduate assistants. And it's a great opportunity for me to have relationships as they continue their life in sports medicine, athletic training, or whatever else. But it's always good to be back, and I appreciate this opportunity today. I came through as an athletic trainer by way of internship. I went through a program at Eastern Kentucky University and got my master's degree there in athletic medicine and sports administration. I left there and became an athletic trainer, the first athletic trainer in the state of Alabama to ever work for a private practice physical therapy program, which was a great experience for me. I learned a lot, and I think they learned a lot from what we did that was different, and attitudes about a lot of different things. That's another conversation though. From there, I went into professional football. I was in the USFL. When that went to rest, I went to a clinical setting again and worked with my team physicians and with a number of other programs within a very small hospital within the Birmingham area. I was involved with a number of other professional sports leagues, a lot of amateur leagues, and eventually our team physicians became team physicians at Auburn, and I went down to start a private practice physical therapy facility and a doctor's office there, much being only an administrator. That's what my expectations were when we got there. After a short time, the university came to me and asked me to start taking their program. Basically, they felt like they needed to come into the 21st century with what they were doing, and they gave me the challenge of doing that. I was there for 15 years. We had a number of people. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I've tried to express to him, several times that knowing people is certainly an important part of the deal, and I know there's been some important people that have helped you on along the way, and I know Bobby Barton's one, and I'm sure James Andrew and Larry Lemack are some others that are. If you know a little bit about athletic training, those are certainly very, very big names. Bobby Barton's a NATA. He's got his own green jacket. He's a Hall of Fame member and a ring to go with it. And James Andrews, if you're not familiar with his name, shame on you. You'll see it all the time. He's an orthopedist who's been in Alabama for a good number of years, and Louisiana, and now Florida. So he's certainly a name to know as well. But and likewise, I'm pleased to know Mike Roberts as somebody who's certainly influenced my life.
Thank you. And Noah's exactly right. The reason I ended up, short story about that, the reason I ended up in professional football with the USFL was strictly because of Bobby Barton and someone that Bobby knew, not that I knew. Our head coach had come from the Pittsburgh Steelers to the Stallions, and my name came up as a candidate, and it was at Eastern Kentucky. And our head coach called back to Ralph Berlin, the head football trainer at the Steelers at that time, and said, "There's some names on here. Can you check on these?" And Ralph was a good friend of Bobby's and called Bobby and said, "Can this kid do it?" Because I was the youngest professional athletic trainer that there had ever been at the time. There's since been younger, but at the time. And Bobby said, if you're going to take someone right out of college, he can do the job. And there were lots of other people that had a whole lot more experience, but they were willing to take a chance. Now, you get into the semantics of the things. Is that because they wanted somebody young and they were starting freshly? My opinion is they were trying to do it because I was probably a little more cheaply coming than the rest of them that would have applied or were willing to accept the job. And all of you need to understand that you're going into administration. But Noah's right. I've been with Dr. Andrews and Dr. Lemack through my time with Auburn for more than 28 years. And to be honest with you, it was very hard for me to leave Auburn and go into sports medicine with other hospitals or other physicians. Not that there weren't good ones out there, but it's hard to work with other people after you've been with arguably the best 3 orthopedic people in the world, or 3 of the top 10 in the world for as long as I was there. The one that we left out was Dr. Bill Clancy from Wisconsin. You all have administrative aspirations. As a matter of fact, and Noah may not remember this, but at one time when I was starting our programs, one of the things I did was get everyone in front of me, graduate assistant wise, and just say, where do you expect to go? What are you planning to do? What about your college studies here? Now, everybody came in, they had a plan. By the time they got there, they had a pretty good understanding, but I wanted to make sure I knew a little bit about what they were doing and where they were going to take it as full advantage as possible of what we were doing at Auburn. And there wasn't anything really special about the options for athletic training opportunities at Auburn educationally. There were no other programs, there were no other specialties. They didn't focus on athletic training in any way, shape, or form. They did have some very good people in the other programs, meaning their exercise science department, i.e. their biomechanics and their physiology, and they did an outstanding job, and frankly still do. It's amazing that they get as much done and as well known as they are with no more than they have. And that's a shame to say about Auburn, but that's true. The advantage that I had, and Noah can appreciate that, was that we were at a D1 opportunity as far as the college was concerned, and I was going to put you in a position to be an athletic trainer. I was going to have you under my wing, but it was going to be at the very tip. I expected you to come in and make decisions, look at things, and do activities, and I knew you were going to make some mistakes. I just knew I didn't want you to make any major problems. And in all honesty, there wasn't but one person that ever had that situation with me, and I ended up letting that person go. Noah, you want to expound on that any while we're waxing eloquently there?
Yeah. Well, the only thing that was jumping in I had other tangents my mind was going into, but yeah, I was, it was a great opportunity for me, and I've certainly told you a lot about my experiences that I had at Auburn along the way, but it was nice to have some degree of autonomy, if in that middle ground level, and certainly Mike was the biggest higher up, and then I had Dave Kendi, who was my immediate supervisor at the time, and really both of them we're here if you need somebody to talk to bounce ideas off of, but otherwise, take it and roll with it. And, I mean, it was a great learning opportunity, and certainly there were a few times where I had questions or problems with life in general, and it was good to have the people to bounce your issues off of. But it was really a great experience for me.
The other thing is that, Noah, were you in the first class?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We were in the first class, or he was in the first class, and I knew that I was going to have this group of people, and they were all certified. Almost all of them were newly certified, and they had each other to bounce ideas, but they had some leadership, hopefully, as we're talking about with myself and with the other staff, and Dave Kendi was certainly one of those. But we had a staff meeting every Monday. I think it was Monday at that time, every Monday, and we talked about all kinds of conceivable things. And it was not unusual for our staff meeting to run an hour and a half to 2 hours sometimes. So, but most of it was conversational. It was more about, okay, where are we going? And it was not unusual. It was a very, very good group in those early years. We met in front of a very long table, and the room always seemed to kind of divide up about thoughts and attitudes and conversation. But again, it was a great thing. Communication is a major part, and I'm sure you already know that. The question I was talking about earlier, I asked Noah what he intended to do. Well, Noah looked at me and he said, well, I hope to be in your position someday soon. And he really did. And that's not unusual for all of my graduate assistants through those years, to some degree, have that expectation. And some of them do and some of them don't. Some of them have not fared well in the dealing with athletic training because of administrative relationships. Some of them have taken, much like Noah, and followed the PhD program and are doing more beneficial, more educational related things, and they're in the classroom or in a lab situation like you guys are all the time, and those are great things. Let's talk about your administrative aspirations. A show of hands, how many of you expect to be head athletic trainers in the near future? Good. Well, okay. All right, so you expect to be a head athletic trainer in, let's say, a large college. Raise your hand. Let's say a D1 school. Okay, that's good. Less than a D1 school. How many of you expect to be in a clinical situation? Meaning a private practice or a hospital or something like that. Not many people want to do that as much, especially when they put the time that you guys have put into this. All right, let's talk about the administrative. If you were going to be in a D1, and Noah, you have to be quiet for a few minutes, you're going to bring in some other information later. If you're going to be in a D1 school situation, do you expect to have more or less politics involved with your athletics, and especially your athletic training practice? Everybody agree?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Bigger staff, and it's a bigger responsibility, and you're at the highest level of the collegiate spectrum, so there's going to be a lot of opinions and personalities and whatnot to deal with.
It's more like a business.
That's a very significant statement. Anybody else? What is your job as an athletic trainer?
You mean at the top?
Well, globally. Your job is to deal with the athletic patient. And that can mean wellness-wise, preventative, injury, rehabilitative, and unfortunately psychological and nutritionally and all the other things that go along with that. Psychologically is the biggest one that comes down the road. Does everybody agree? It's your job to take care of the individual athlete.
Yes.
Do you think that premise, your individual athletic requirement and politics, cohesive union or not?
I'm sorry, Mike.
Not.
You cut out for a moment on us.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you think that your responsibility as a healthcare administrator for that individual athlete is against the process of politics?
Yeah.
Can politics get in the way of what your physicians, your therapists, and your thoughts about healthcare for that individual athlete?
Yes.
Got a collective yes there.
Yes. Well, good. You've taught them well then.
That's the clinical experience that's talking.
I'm going to ask you all a question in a few minutes about a scenario, and I'll be curious to see how you handle it, because you're all going to be administrators. You're all going to have to handle the tough questions. whether you're administrators as head athletic trainer or whether you become an administrator higher in the level of the process. And it really won't matter what size school it is, or professional organization for that matter. It'll have to do with, unfortunately, a lot of politics. Let me talk to you just a little bit now about drug testing. As Noah mentioned, I've been in drug testing or involved with drug testing for a number of years. I learned about it when I was in graduate school myself at the University of Kentucky. I had drug testing go on with our players, administrators, and our staff when I was in the USFL. No other leagues do that currently. And it's in all colleges and universities now. It's in every major sport, and it's done in a lot of high schools. And workplaces are great, are ramping up to do that more and more in almost every walk of life. Drug testing is about who, not about what. It's the individual that if you're in a institution or a workplace scenario, you are talking about that individual again. It's the same person that we started talking about a few minutes ago. Your responsibility to an athlete as the caretaker for them. And it is all about who. What is the problem? Whether it's alcohol, street drugs, drugs of abuse such as morphine, amphetamines, other pain pills, all the type things that they can get in trouble with, the Xanax. There's all kinds of things that an individual can get in major problems with and have an addictive reaction or addictive behavior to follow that up. And it's not an easy road to deal with. And it's unfortunate how many people come into bearing with that. At Auburn, I had a number of people each year that left the program because of various levels of addiction, and we've had several major problems. And one in particular comes to mind. We had an athlete that was a world-class swimmer that came into our program that never got a chance to go to a class because he registered in school in the summer, had the opportunity to take, well, I guess he did take a class because he did take one summer class. But his drug of abuse was alcohol. And he was an alcoholic long before he came to us. It just became apparent when he got to us. And he never played. He never participated ever again. And he had family that were medalist swimmers. He had opportunities to be all kinds of places. And as the youngest sibling in this whole process, he just never figured that part out. And he would have drank himself to death if he had gotten the opportunity. And frankly, he was trying at the time. Why addictions like these? That's really the question. And there's no really great answer for me to say that. And frankly, this little discussion is drug testing and drug communications in a nutshell. Why is the problem, and being able to figure it out, and one of the steps or one of the pieces in your puzzle as being an athletic trainer to deal and take responsibility for one individual athlete at a time's health care is a very tough thing to handle. Like I say, there are other psychological things that can be involved. There are eating disorders, there's abuse situations, there's lots of other things. But the quickest way for someone to go sour in this day and age is for some of the drug abuse situations that are out there. Now, I can talk a long time about it, but I want to hear what you want to find out about this specifically. So, either by one at a time around the room, starting from the left to right, or either just by raising hands and go in some various tangent. Let's hear what you have to ask about drug testing, administration, and maybe some of the things in my background.
When you guys do like NCAA drug testing, like do you choose what you're testing for? Because I've seen a scenario this past fall where players were actually using some street drugs, but they weren't tested for that. And I thought when the NCAA chose to do a drug test that it did everything, like steroids, street drugs, and everything.
You have a good question, and I have another thing. You mentioned right off about the NCAA. Was that an NCAA drug test?
Yeah.
It is the NCAA drug test is probably different from what we do. I know it is. Ours is a lot more comprehensive in a sect. The other thing that may have had an effect on that is the level that they test at. Aegis Labs is very proud to say that we have what is known as a zero tolerance. Most of the drugs that we test for, we can test down to 2 nanograms. That's almost as small a unit as you can possibly do. The only smallest is completely zero, and you wouldn't find anything at 0. So we're mixing with one margin of 1 nanogram. A lot of drug tests, for instance, for a long time in the NCAA, the number for its post-championship things was 50 nanograms. 50. And then they dropped it down to 25. And for a number of years while I was at Auburn, it was at 15.
Wow.
So it has a lot to do with the lab. It has a lot to do with, are you really trying to find out? Doing a test or doing a program just to say we have a program is really not very beneficial to anybody. And the fact is, it may be more of a hindrance. In the SEC, and I have the most experience there, but I have a lot of background in a lot of other conferences now since I've been at Aegis, because we take care of over 140 colleges and universities in the United States now. When I joined Aegis, the guy that I worked with by the name of Mike Colello is our salesperson for sports. He is an athletic trainer, used to be with the Cleveland Browns NFL football team. But he's a salesperson with that. There were, when I joined, there were 46 teams. And now he's added literally in a little over 5 years, 100 teams. So it's a good, big program. The other thing, when I was first with Aegis, when we started, there were 3 of the, at that time, 12 SEC teams were Aegis. All but 2 of the 14 teams are Aegis teams now. Now, let's go back to what we were originally discussing. Drug testing as a program is there to benefit the student athlete. It is to add a little parity or balancing of the field, if you will, for all of your athletic base. There are a number of things that you, as a administrator, or you as a director of a program, or you as the AD of a university can demand from your program. But it has to be in your policy. It has to be in what you put together. And then you have to follow it. If you put a program together and say, yes, we're going to test for, we're going to use THC. Everybody knows that THC
Yes.
is marijuana, correct? When you test it, that's what it would be spelled out on a positive on a drug test. It's THC. Now, when that is done, if you're going to say that we're going to test everything at 50, you're going to catch people that are doing it probably the night before or the week before, or habitual users, and those people that use it 1 or 2 days before are probably not going to get into it. And generally, when I see people that are doing that kind of number, they have a very concrete set of days that they're going to do drug testing on. We do drug testing every Thursday, and everybody on the campus and half the people in the state begin to know that. That same thing is true at a workplace too, though. Again, you get out of something what you put into it. If you're trying to set up a program, if you're trying to be aware and a corrective measure in this, if you're trying to do a significant thing for your athletes, then I think it's that way. Now, people have said I kind of get on a high horse when I say that. Does everybody know what that means? That's a Southern term, get on your high horse. Yeah. I do to a degree. we talk about from the NCAA and we talk about universities and depending on the athletic director. Noah, our athletic director when you were there was David Howell, and he was 110% for the student athlete first and anything that we needed to do after. Now, don't get me wrong, he was a great administrator and he played his cards very well. But if it had to do with student health care, it was whatever we determined first. And drug testing was a major entity, and he gave me full reins to do what needed to be done with it. And the reason I say that is when I came to Auburn, they weren't doing a very good job of drug testing. They really weren't testing many people. They were giving them plenty of warning and notice, and the people that they were testing were the people that were going to the FCA programs more than anything else.
Going to what programs?
FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Let me give you another example. This goes back to the workplace, and we've seen this a number of times. And it, to a degree, it probably affects colleges and universities, but it takes a lot longer for it to happen. We also at Aegis work with a number of healthcare agencies. The Nashville area, which is where our labs are, is a teething industry of healthcare management operations. And there are a lot of groups that own various parts of the country, own hospitals, various sizes of hospitals. Well, they teamed up with us, and when they go and buy out a hospital, one of the first things that happens is we go in and drug test everybody there from an outside perspective. And you'd be amazed at how many people that are scheduled, have been at a place for a number of years, don't ever show back up to work. Once they know that a testing is going on, they don't come back. And it's true in other workplaces. You'll have a peak of positives, and then it will recline and sink down, and then you'll have a very different workplace. People talk about your workers' comp goes down, your overall attitude at the workplace change. There's a number of things. But it's if they need a job and they need to support whatever their drugs are using, if they feel like they can do it at your place because they're not testing or they don't do a good job of testing, it'll stay there. Once you start testing, those people will leave because they won't fight it. They're not going to argue. They're just going to go find another place and do what they want to do. And that's a terrible thing. It's like rats on a sinking ship. All right, you had a good question. Did I answer some of it for you?
Yes, you did.
Who's next?
Is the
Yes,
drug
ma'am.
testing really randomized? I know a lot of people say they've been repeatedly picked over and over, or is it really a random test for other sports?
That's a good question. One of my major jobs, it's my major task at Aegis is to do the NASCAR drug testing program. I help work with it's called a substance abuse program, a SAP. The substance abuse program administrator, I work directly with him and we make sure that we carry out the program. And that means that we also make the randomizations. A true random program is truly that. If I take all of you in a room and we have drug testing today, but we're going to have drug testing tomorrow, and then we're going to have it again Saturday, and then we're going to have it again Tuesday. Because each one of you are in that room in a true random program, each one of you will be in that pool the next day. Now, we may check only a small percentage of you. We may say half or 25% or 3% or 10%. There's all kinds of mixtures, as opposed to saying, well, we're going to check everybody today and then we're going to check percentages after that. Any of that can happen. But your name in a truly random program is eligible to come up because you are in the pool every time. And if you're an athlete, and I have this with the NASCAR people all the time, if you're an athlete and your name happens to come up, you're just lucky. People say, well, wait a minute, that's not statistically true. Well, it is. You have a 50% chance of being chosen. But people say, well, wait a minute, how do I have a 50% chance if you start choosing those other people? You can't think of it in that term. Think of it from the big lotto thing out of Chicago where they take all the balls and they drop them in that blower and it starts rolling around. Everybody in there has a chance. If all of you have one of those little balls, every one of you have a chance. And if we do that every hour with the same balls, every one of you have a chance. And it wouldn't be surprising for Noah to be picked 8 out of 10 times, because he has a chance 10 out of 10 times. Does that make sense? So if people are talking about a truly random program, they need to understand that that's the way it would be. It's not like, okay, well, if you were chosen yesterday, we're not going to choose you again on Monday. We have a problem with that from our perspectives. If I tell Noah that, if he's a drug user, what does he know? He knows that he's free to use for a while because he's going to have a window of time before he gets checked again. Yes, Noah?
Just had a couple of questions.
Sure.
One of which was, from the administrative side, do you code things or kind of randomly change the numbers so that when you are essentially picking people, going through the randomization process, that at least right off the get-go, you don't really even know who they are. It's blind to you. You just say, here are the numbers, test these people, and then essentially the drug testers go out and select those individuals and get their samples. So that's part one. And the other is, say if you're at Auburn University and you have a positive drug test one time, then, in all likelihood, you're probably going to be tested more than on a random basis, correct?
To answer the number 2 part of that, yes. But that again depends on your policy.
Right.
We'll come back to that. Let's go back to part 1. The randomization is set up based, as you talk about, Noah, and we have varying levels of the way people manage that. I'm going to give you a few examples. We do a service for our universities through what is known as SAMs. It's a randomization process that you as your school give us your list of athletes in a spreadsheet. We enter it into this SAMs and then we give it back to you and you enter it on your computer. That way, all of your volleyball players, all your men's and women's basketball players, and all your men's soccer players, every time they take a test, you can take that information and import it back into that data, and you will be able to track all that. And the thing is, when you give us the roster and tell us who that is, we put a numeric marker with that name. Then we send it back to you. We're not interested in who they are. We're interested in that number. When we do a random for you, if you call and say we need to do 50% of the soccer team, and we need to do 10% of both basketballs, and we need to do 50% of the volleyball teams, we have that in those segments and we have the numbers associated. We don't know who they are, nor do we care. We just make sure we get a random pull of those 50%. It's not just, if there's 10 volleyball, we'll pull the top 5. That's not the way that works either. It's the same way, just like we were talking about the little balls. And that information is sent back to you, and you have to take that identifying number and line it up with the person you got, and then you go tell them what you want to do. Your drug test is going to be at such date. Now, there are a couple of our schools that are extremely squirrely about this whole attitude. They have our program, they love what it does, but they give them a random number. They created a random number at the university and reassign that number to that person's name. And when they're drawn, that person, Noah for instance, through those 2 random numbers, goes to literally a blackboard and pulls another number off of that blackboard, and they erase it. And that number is what he uses for his drug test for the day. So there's 3 areas that don't let you know who Noah is. There's no way that can be known. And just so you'll know, when Noah or anyone does our drug test, if it's a properly done forensic lab collection and a lab test, Noah's name is never on it. His personal name is never on it. That identifying number, whatever that number may be, as long as it's able to be lined up by the administrator of the program, which may be one of you in this case, whoever is administering the program, as long as they can match it up to whoever they're trying to keep their testing on, that's the only identifying factor it has to be. Because if he has a positive, either the MRO or the team physician or whoever has to be able to come back and say, this is your test on this day. Is that correct? This is your number. Do you have your copy? Which they should have. Very few ever do, but they should have it. And this is your writing, and this is your phone number, and this, well, you tested positive for whatever. And then you're going to have a conversation based on your policy from there. Answer that?
You did.
A random program is really the only way for a program to be successful. You can never know when you're going to be tested. And the reason for that, and I'll tell you because we work with Major League Baseball Players Association, we work with lots of companies, and NASCAR, again, the same thing. Well, why don't you just get us all and test us all this weekend, and let's not do this periodically like we're doing? Well, it takes a whole lot of time to do it that way, and it would take you and them out of whatever they're trying to get accomplished. And especially in athletics, we're very sensitive to that. I know about what goes into it. You know about what goes into your practices and programs. And as it is said, student athletes don't get a whole lot of time on their own anyway when they're participating in college athletics. So you're trying to make that as minimal a process as possible, but still benefit from a drug testing program. So you truly do want to have percentages. It's cost effective. It's management by your people easily into, they will go out of random and they will go into follow-up. And follow-up may be whatever it denotes. If you remember, Noah, the way that we had a program, we had a 3-strike plan. You had a first positive, and you started getting tested on a weekly basis. And you had a number of other things that were based on treatment, but you had other things. You would get tested on a weekly basis. If you were doing well and didn't have any other positives during the course of a year, basically we looked at it as an academic year, but if it were in the waning part of this academic year, it would start over in the fall. But you test for a full year. If you didn't have any problems, then we put you back into random only and you'd go from there. If you had a second positive, either in the random or in your follow-ups, you were going to get tested twice a week. And the reason for that is, if you don't know, marijuana generally stays in your system longer than most things. If it's just marijuana, it's a fairly easy thing to track. But if you're really pushed, you're probably going to go to something else. And we needed to be able to track that, and most other drugs, not all, but most other drugs have a much shorter life in the system, and we need to be able to follow that. If you had a third positive test at Auburn, we were going to release you. Now, when I say that, and I'm speaking specifically about Auburn and as I knew it when I was there, if you tested positive with us a third time, our athletic director said as long as they would participate in treatment, he would fund the treatment. If they balked, if they didn't want to participate, or if they just kind of went on about their merry way, they didn't have an option after that. But they would never come back to school as an athlete with us. Get the impact of that? Rehab healthcare is not an inexpensive proposition. We were trying to do what was best for the athlete, even though that athlete would have never, or potentially never, ever been an athlete with us before, or again, rather. We were going to give them the benefit of the doubt. They needed to care. With that being said, I'm going to give you an interesting stat. At Auburn, if you tested positive on your first test, and this is specifically about marijuana, if you tested positive and you tested positive a second time, you were probably going to test positive a third time within 8 months of the original positive. And that happened on about 28 occasions. It was a chilling fact, to be honest with you, that if we had one that was going to get in a situation that he was going to test positive there, if they tested positive the second time, they were, within 8 months of the original test, they were going to test positive the third time. And that happened every time. If you tested positive, all 28 of those did that. Next question. Come on.
Folks, don't make me ask questions.
What about like false positives and stuff?
Okay, can you speak up?
Yeah. I have a question about like false positives and how the standard of protocol changes when somebody gets that appointed to their name, you know?
A false positive?
Yeah.
Number one, we don't have a false positive. And the reason is, a false positive is the worst possible thing in drug testing.
Right.
And that's what I say. Our labs will not produce a false positive. We just won't. If we have any question about its validity, it'll never be reported as a positive. We will confirm it literally a dozen times before that would ever happen.
Okay.
And we have not reported things on many occasions because we could not quantify exactly what the issue was. I'll give you an example. We started making some changes. All of you know what K2 and spice and all that stuff is, right?
Yeah.
You've all heard of that. The marijuana substitutes, basically, are synthetic. Okay? When those started really coming out, we understood, found out, and started making some changes and started looking for some things. And we were getting an odd marker. And we could tell there was something, but we really didn't know for sure what it was. And by the way, if you don't know how our side of the industry finds these things out, it's through emergency rooms and morgues. People will start using something and they will have an overdose and they will be called upon to if someone dies, they'll have to find it out. And our lab helps to do that in various places. For us, it's forensic medicine. We help a lot of courts and justice systems, but we help an awful lot of quote unquote the CSI type situation. But just that bit of fact, we find out because emergency rooms start seeing and reporting that kind of stuff, not just to us, but the whole industry, that these kind of things are happening. And then we get tissues or we get biopsies or we get pieces and we start studying it further so that we can run those markers to find out what's really going on. I hate to say it, but it's very much a tit for tat relationship. People that are in the drug industry generally don't use drugs. They're strictly out to make money. And those people that are in our profession are trying to help keep that from being an issue. We're trying to stop that from being a problem. They're smart and intelligent people, and we're smart and intelligent. It kind of is a continual scale that's always trying to balance. We were talking about false positives. Again, we don't report anything that we know that we couldn't back up. There have been some things that have been looked at for years. I'll give you an example. Noah, you may or may not know about this. A good friend of mine who's actually getting inducted into the NATA Hall of Fame this weekend trained under me when I was with the Stallions. He's the head athletic trainer and director of sports medicine at Georgia. Georgia had a offensive tackle football player that in high school, apparently, supposedly, he didn't know that his physician gave him a shot of steroids to help with a shoulder problem that he had. Anabolic steroids. He did not know this. When he signed his scholarship and went to Georgia, he knew, he heard the spiel, everybody knew. You just don't do that in college because everybody knows you're going to get tested, especially in the SEC. Well, he got tested and he had a positive. He's been trying to get rid of that positive, and he's never used again, but he cannot get the level of the steroid to drop below the NCAA's level. And it's been 3 years. And he's actually had a biopsy, a removal of the site where the injection was to try to take it out.
Wow.
And he just can't get rid of it. Now think about it. This is a guy that didn't choose that, from what we understand, did not choose that. He did not request that type of scenario, that kind of health care, but the physician that did it felt like it would be beneficial, and potentially it was beneficial. But his physiological makeup has precluded him from being a player because he can't rid himself of this substance. And it's very rare that it be this way. It's a 3-year sticker for him. Yes, sir.
I think I may have addressed this last year as well, but I think I heard about a basketball player at University of Tennessee who came up positive for, again, anabolic substances, but yet he never took it, or never took anabolic substances. But lo and behold, they could tell there was something very wrong in terms of his hormonal profile. Lo and behold, he had testicular cancer. And that essentially gave him a false positive in that case. Do these types of situations come up? Well, I would assume they wouldn't be too frequent, but how often do you see issues like this?
Well, if you have a reason to question that, and that's part of the reason, let me step back a minute. When I went to Auburn, Aegis was not the lab that we worked with. We were actually with Aegis only 9 of the 15 years that I was at Auburn. There were other groups, and frankly, they did a very benign basic test. And they certainly didn't do steroids. If we did the steroid test, that particular lab sent it to Aegis. Well, I got to know the people at Aegis by a number of different ways, but mainly by their salesperson who I met at various things because he came to SEC activities. And I knew that I wanted to make a change. And it was one of the best things that I ever did because I got a chance to literally talk to the guy that was running the lab. And that was Dr. Black at the time. And I could ask anything. I could give him any scenario. I could tell him, look, I just don't sense that this guy is the kind of problem. He has nothing to gain with this. I mean, hell, he's playing his last college football game. He doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of going to the NFL. There's no reason for him to be taking a steroid. He's not going into the paratroopers or the Green Beret or, there's no reason for him to take a steroid. I just don't believe that's the case. And we got a chance to talk over all of these scenarios or all these type things. Well, he said, Mike, that's very interesting. Let's run some other things. Let's try to find this out. And it was not only that, it was lots of other things. But I was greatly blessed, if you will, to have the opportunity to work again with the top people in the field in that regard. And I was talking with him day to day if I needed to do so. That was what the benefit was with working with Aegis. And that's still the case today. Even with the larger numbers, we have 3 or 4 people that's all they do is spend their time on specifically doing research on the topics of the things that are out there and on these questioning type tests so that we can find out what the answer is, so that we can dig in and do whatever needs to be done. Noah, going back to your question, your body will do some things and it'll kick out some strange issues. The the one that you're talking about is absolutely true. You can have some changes. If you go another step or two further, and we actually did or not. And in the case that you're talking about, it was not.
Excuse me, Mike. We missed you there. You were choppy. You sounded like the Charlie Brown teacher for a few moments.
Okay. Sorry about that. Your comments about the Tennessee guy.
Right.
If that would have been an internally related thing, endogenous, there is a carbon test that's done. It's about an $1,800 test, but you can take anything and determine whether it's internal or externally generated. And so in this particular case, in a steroid or related substance change where something odd with TE or something with the steroidal imbalance himself, you could tell whether it was done that way. One of the things I mentioned is that we had a case at Auburn. We had a kid that was much the same scenario I was mentioning to you. He was not a starter, he couldn't play in the NFL, and he didn't have any great aspirations of going beyond that. And all of a sudden the NCAA says he can't play in the last bowl game of his senior career because he's tested positive for steroid. And I said, well, what was he positive for? Well, we haven't isolated that specifically, but his TE ratio is unusually high. Well, we did steroid testing at Auburn, and I had tested him 3 different times. By luck of the draw, he had had 3 tests with us. And his TE ratio was always high with us. So I took that and said, we've always had this as well. Are you telling me his number was higher than these ratios in the process? Well, actually, it doesn't look like it, but we know that he's positive. I said, well, that's not going to be good enough. And my athletic director at the time said, Mike, I don't know how we can fight the NCAA. I said, well, I do. And I called him back and I said, I want this test that you still can't name carbon tested. Now, I didn't just think that up. I called Dr. Black, we talked about it at length, and he said, well, if that's what you think, Mike, as you know, the only way to really substantiate that is for making them do that test. So we called the NCAA back from the AD's office 2 days before Christmas and said, here's the deal. Either he's going to play or you're going to prove to us what the problem is and that it is from an external source. Well, they called me back personally. And said, you can let this guy go. It doesn't look like that was the case. So he did get to go to his senior bowl game afterwards. Again, it's all about the science. As a matter of fact, and I'm going to get on Aegis's soap wagon here, Dr. Black is very, very ethical. He's very driven by the fact that it's all about the science. Science does not lie. He is more impressed with the fact of getting this right based on the science than he is any other aspect of it. And that's probably the reason that we are with the major league athletes that are out there, Players Association, MLB, NFL, hockey, basketball. He is on the advisory board for their systems in all the Players Association because it's about getting it right. If they get some test or they get some report or get some study and he goes over it and tells them, this guy's as dirty as he can be, there's no argument about that. They don't fight it, they go on. But if they said, this is not good science, the people that did this part of the testing, they don't have a clue as to what's really going on. And you look at these aspects. And he'll go to court, he'll go to arbitration, he'll go to any scenario. And he's met in front of Congress a number of times about various things. And when all the big question about steroids in baseball came around many years ago, he was right in the middle of it. And he's an expert witness for all kinds of things, literally multiple times a week. So, next question. If I answered all that.
Oh, they're making me do it, Mike.
I see.
I
Well,
was-
let's put them on the spot. Okay. I have a question for all of you. It's 10, 15 years down the road, and you're a athletic trainer. You've actually climbed up the rung even further, and you're the associate AD for athletic health care. Drug testing, however, is still under your domain and it's part of your program. And you have to be the one to maintain it, you keep the policy properly, and I'm sure you do a great job. However, in your written policy, you have some certain stipulations, and we're making an assumption that it's a 3-strike policy. And one of your teams is going to the NCAA soccer championship, or going to the a BCS bowl, they're getting ready to play off for that, or you got one of your basketball teams is trying to get into the Final Four. And all of a sudden, one of your student athletes who's tested positive twice before has a positive drug test in the random system that you guys have, not NCAA, not anything else. And you've got your athlete, and your program says, your policy says that he's going to be released upon finding out and confirmation of this positive. And he's notified, she's notified that they have a positive. And by the way, I say that very specifically, he or she. Substance abuse doesn't have a gender. It's a lot more prevalent in females than most people think. So understand that when you get out there. To get back to that, it's going to be in your situation to figure out, what are you going to do? Do you think you're going to hear anything from this basketball coach? And by the way, this athlete literally is the major athlete for your team. It's always that way, or it seems that. It's always going to be a part of it. Your athlete, he doesn't deny it, she doesn't deny it. They've been going through the counseling, you've been doing all types of other things, but they really haven't stopped. But they want to play, and it may be their next step to the next level. It's your university's opportunity to glean. Like I say, the coaches come to you, the associate ADs and the other parts of it, all of them are all up. What are you going to do? Some of it, understandably, is it's going to be based on your policy and the way you handled it. The way it's written. But if you're put in that situation, what are you going to do? I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
She said call Noah, but I would refer to Mike Roberts, and you might go to Dr. Black. So
Seriously, I want to know. You're an administrator. It's on your shoulders now. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight for it? It's going to be your gleaming spot to be back, or maybe the first time, in an NCAA championship event. Maybe the first NCAA title scenario that your school's ever been in. And it might be the pros. In all frankness, in the pros, you're not going to hear about it. It'll be well after that activity, because it'll go back and forth in arbitration so long, it won't matter, except in NASCAR. In NASCAR, if it happens, they go straight to the press, because they don't have a collective bargaining plan. If they get positive and get escorted out of the track, the next thing they do is have a press conference. But if you're in these others, it's your school. You're going to be the one that's going to be a major part of deciding what's going on. Which way are you going to vote? And I assure you, you won't be the only vote. That's the other killer. You will not be probably the deciding factor. But what are you going to do?
Follow the policy.
well, I'm going to follow the policy. Another one.
Yeah.
Anybody not follow the policy? No takers?
You have to, because if you don't follow the policy, one, that says something about your ethical or your moral standards. Two, it's probably gonna come back and bite you in the butt, like years later. And if it is the one time that you get to go to the NCAA championship or whatever, what if that's the only time you do, and it ends up finding out years later, then you get your championship taken from you, you have, all these repercussions, almost kind of like the Penn State situation, where they ended up taking away all these wins and everything because people knew about it and let it go. So it's like, which is the worst evil, like losing this opportunity or potentially a whole bunch of people getting fired and losing.
If you do it for one kid, you should do it for other kids.
Exactly.
If you do it for one, you gotta do it for all, so.
Did you hear all that, Mike?
I heard some of it, but I was just gonna say, wait a minute, this is your first.
I get it.
We're cutting out again.
Yes, bowl game. This is the first time championship basketball event, and your star center, she's got a little bit of a problem with marijuana. And wait a minute, we're gonna do this.
I mean, I would definitely confirm.
The academic
make sure
people are gonna
that
come to you.
100%.
The assistant coaches are all. There might even be some players that come say, "Well, we understand that, but she's never a problem with us. There's all kinds of, and it would hurt us as much as it would her. If she's not there, we're not who we are. Are we gonna let her play?
The blame should be on her, not us.
Right, especially if it's the third time. You knew the first time, you knew the second time. And if it was that big of a problem and your teammates are like, oh, she's not a problem with us, they should have helped her stay out of trouble. That's all.
Well, they did. They tried their best. they literally were trying their best.
Well, then they can't be mad at anybody but her because she messed it up. That's how I feel, I think.
I agree.
You can't.
I think we've got a consensus. They're saying follow the rules.
Good.
If you do the first time.
Good. I hope your heads are still that hard when you get into a room with 5 other people, and one of them may be the president of the university and the athletic director and everybody on the board wanting to talk about that.
It's a pressure cooker, huh?
Yeah, it's not where I've not ever been, but I assure you that everybody in all of athletics at varying degrees have that same type scenario that comes about. And it's not good. The question again still gets back to what your position is. And again, if you're an administrator, you may have virtually no contact with this person on a day-to-day basis, but from a healthcare provider perspective, student healthcare, your job is still to take care of that athlete. And the question becomes a little bit, is it in their best interest to play that or not play? And I have to tell you, there are some of the places that we do drug testing programs with now, and when I talk to some of the athletic directors and frankly, some of the athletic trainers as well, they are shifting a little bit to the left on their thinking about, well, let's understand within reason. And it's kind of like, well, abstinence is not absolutely the best thing. It never really was that great with sex. It might not be that way with drugs now either. And to me, sometimes that's kind of a hard pill to swallow.
All right, we're running a little short on time. Do we have any further questions? This is our last opportunity here. I could sit and ask you questions all day long, but we've all got schedules to keep.
I understand. Anybody, anything?
I've got one, and it's not related to drug testing per se.
All right.
You're an athletic trainer, and you're not functioning in the traditional athletic training setting anymore. Do you feel you're being utilized as appropriately as you could be, and do you have any regrets?
Interesting question. And Noah knows a little bit about this with me. Some of these things we're talking about is part of the reason I got fired from Auburn. We changed athletic directors, and it was his ship, he can go where he wants with it. And I got to jousting with him, and we just didn't see eye to eye on things, and I got fired. And to be honest with you, it crushed me for about 6 weeks, because I'd never lost at anything like that. I really only had 3 jobs ever in my life. I just continued on. But with a little time and with the ability to have good friends and the scenarios that are in sports medicine and the people that I've known, that's part of the way that this came about. And frankly, life is way better out of the pressure cooker of being in a college situation at a D1 institution with some of the issues and the politics that I had to put up with day to day. And I hate to say this about myself, but it was not so much I was managing me, while I believed, and I would tell people, yeah, I don't take anything home from the training room. When I walk out the door, I stop it. I don't worry about it. That is not absolutely true. I basically just kept my head down and kept going forward for the things that I felt like we had to have and had to do and had to be done for our athletes properly. And I won't deny any of those things, but like I say, the perspective changed. We're not dealing with athletics as much as we are entertainment once you get to a Division I sport like that. And you ask the athletes, it's not fun to play that sport anymore. It becomes work because it's all these hours a week. The NCAA wouldn't be holding limits on the number of hours that you could participate, and nobody does if that weren't the case. Because everybody's trying to do something different. And they're all trying to win, but they're all trying to go about it in a different way to try to get there. Do I think that I'm utilized in that? Yes, I would not change anything that I've done in all of my career. Especially with the kids, and that's the athletes, and especially the graduate assistant people and staff that I've had. I've never had a bad scenario with that, from my perspective. I'm sure there are people that didn't see eye to eye with me, and that's fine. As long as we all talked about it, that's fine. When I was in a situation where I worked for someone else, I was the same way. It was their ship. We said what we needed to say. And once it was all said and done, if that wasn't the way they wanted to go with it, then that's fine. I got to go where they're going, and I'll do it as best I can. And I think all of my people always tried to do that with me. So I have no regrets in that regard. Where we currently are, I wish I were doing a few more things with athletic training, but I'm old enough now, my wants won't hurt me. I've done a lot of athletic training, and I've been around an awful lot of really good athletes, and working with what I do with NASCAR now is not any different from dealing when I was with college or when I was with my pro football. They're all athletes, they're just different teams, and I interact with all of them all the time. NASCAR has an event every weekend, and all of their teams come to play at the same time. When we were playing football or baseball or any of these others, it was 2 at a time, and you work toward getting to that one thing. It's just that all these guys play at the same time. So I enjoy it. I'm having a great time with a lot of things. It's a lot of travel. No one knows about that, but I've got some good staff that I'm bringing up along the lines with that, and I think we're all doing pretty good.
Well, I always want to keep their eyes open to, if the pressure cooker becomes too great for them at some point in time, what are different avenues that they can follow if they want gainful employment in related areas. So certainly Aegis is, from what I see, a good hire of athletic trainers, and we'll always keep our eyes open to other sources that might be out there as well.
Well, the other thing, and I mentioned this early on, and frankly, and this is true of men anyway, but I really had a good time in all the clinical settings that I was in. I was fortunate that I worked very close to the physicians, and not just Andrews and Lemack and Clancy, but all the physicians that we worked with. So I had a good time in the hospital, I had a good time in the emergency rooms, I had a good time in rehab, I had a good time in the other clinical things that I had. And When I ran the sports medicine program with Health South and with Alabama Sports Medicine, what it was at the time, I had 75 people working for me, including the clerical people that did all the insurance stuff and the 40 people of sports medicine people that were outside. 20 of those were athletic trainers. So we had a big staff and we had lots of people, but even then I had a good time because it was interacting with people. And I think a lot of it has to do with your personality, and if you're a happy person, hopefully you're gonna be happy in a lot of things. My wife tells me I'm a stick in the mud about a lot of things sometimes, but that's part of it too.
I think our spouses have a good way of grounding us that way.
No doubt. They can sum us up in many few words.
Mike, thank you so much. We certainly do appreciate it.
Great to be with all of you again.
All right. Well, I'll be giving you a call again one of these days, perhaps 12 months from now, but hopefully sooner.
I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
I have one last question. How many of you guys are going to the convention this week?
Yeah, I think we're limited. Yeah.
I'm poor. We're poor. We're poor.
Yeah, we're
Extra poor.
when it was in Philly a couple of years ago, we had real good turnout, but as exciting as Las Vegas is, they've got summer classes they're dealing with right now, and it's a little bit of a challenge for all of us.
I hear you. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mike.
This is an awkward clap.
The slow clap.
But we like go slow.
Right.
You know, they got that.